able to do.
No, but the concept of continual test,
Yes.
it goes to a new level, because when we think of continuous integration and test or continuous integration and deployment, we're always thinking of software development. I'm developing something new, I'm testing it before it ever goes out. This is a whole new game. This is, I'm continuously testing production. Welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. This is Darren Pulsifer, Chief Solution Architect, author, and most importantly, your host. On today's episode, Securing AI, with returning guest, Steve Orrin, CTO of Intel Federal. Steve, welcome to the show again and again and again.
Thanks, Darren. It's great to be back.
I don't know how many times it's been, but I think you and Dr. Scott are like almost dead even on the number of times you've been on the show.
That's awesome. So we got to keep the race going.
That's right. So today I brought Steve on because there's a bunch of hype around generative AI. There's a bunch of hype around zero trust architecture or philosophies. And Steve always is a straight shooter. So Steve, and you got nothing to sell. All my other guests have an idea or something to sell. So Steve, what's the whole deal with AI and cybersecurity? Are they at crossroads? Are they conflicting? Is it the Wild West? And who cares about security? Everyone should care about security. So what's the real thing? What's really going on?
Well, Darren, I like the fact that you asked about that. And it's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of the Wild West in some places. It's a little bit of trying to get an understanding of what this means to organizations. But first, let's start with the terms. Because when you say AI and security, you can mean different things. So I want to sort of break it down. Okay. And I like to look at the world from two sides of the coin. So one is, how do we secure AI? And that's a topic that everyone is talking about. And the other side of the coin is, how do we use AI to enhance cybersecurity and to enhance security and risk management? And they are very different, but there's some relation between the two. But I want to treat them separately so that we can separate the terms and our understanding of what's required and what ultimately the value to the customer or to the end user will be.
I totally agree. We need to secure AI, its own topic, and then how can we leverage AI in cybersecurity? All right. So which one do you want to talk about today? And then we'll have you come back on and talk about the other one next time.
Well, let's start with how do we secure AI, because that is an important topic. And we need to be able to trust this stuff. And so when we look at securing AI, again, I want to break that into two areas of focus. One is where a lot of people are focused today on the tactical side, which is, how do I actually secure this thing? The inferencing, the ongoing training, the infrastructure. How do I secure this AI solution, this AI product, this AI service that I'm deploying? And then the other side of that is, how do I actually secure everything that led up to that point? The pipeline, the development lifecycle, which is actually probably in many cases more important, because if you can't trust what you're going to deploy, you could secure it very well, but it would be by default untrustworthy because you have no visibility into what built the thing in the first place.
Okay, let's talk about the first one first. It sounds to me like we can use our application cybersecurity best practices when deploying applications into our infrastructure or the cloud. Can I just use the same best practices I've already used in my deployments for AI? Can I just use the same? Is that going to be sufficient?
So, Darren, your last word there is the key one. So, yes, you absolutely should use all of the best practices that you deploy other application environments as your baseline. But you can't stop there, because AI is different than a transaction server, a web server, or some sort of online capability or offering. But you got to start with the basics. So deploying that infrastructure securely in the systems, monitoring, authentication, application security, network security, all of those things have to come to play. Separation, isolation, everything you would normally do for any application environment absolutely have to be there. But you can't stop there, because AI is a different beast. And so once you've done that first phase of making sure it's secure from an infrastructure and deployment, then you start to consider, okay, what are the things I have to do differently because it is an AI? And two things to keep in mind with an AI or three things actually. One is an AI is an evolving entity. It learns all the time. And so there's an ongoing process. It's not a static thing. Two, by its very nature, it is dependent on the things that come in, the data sources, the inferencing, the queries, the prompts, or the sensing that it's doing. So it's very dependent on the things you're feeding that AI. And then three is understanding that the model that you've created and that you're deploying in the weights will change, just like applications do, but they don't change. Applications change when you do an update. An AI can change every time you query it, like especially in large language models, they're learning from their prompts as they get better and richer. And so the attack model that you have on these AIs, and there's terms that we've got now like prompt injection, poisoning, coercive data, those have to be taken into account, those threats, as we look at how do we secure the AI once it's been deployed. And the other thing I just want to throw out there is because it's an evolving thing and it's learning, is the monitoring has to be a little different than just monitoring the logs to make sure, hey, did someone access the application? That's not what we're talking about when we say monitoring an AI. We almost have to continually do testing to make sure that the AI hasn't started to go astray, started hallucinating or started to provide false information or information that's not relevant or how relevant it is based on the weights. So there needs to be ongoing testing of the AI because it lives in a real world environment. And so I would say we build off of the foundational security that you would do for any application, but we have to go much further to protect that AI throughout its life cycle and protect the things that it connects to. And that is something you think about organizations. When you have someone deploying a web server for doing, let's say, banking applications, the bank focuses on the app. They may do a little bit to force some better authentication from the end user, but they don't secure the browser. They don't secure the system the user comes from.
Of course not. Yeah.
But in an AI, especially if you're thinking about as something that's sensing from a remote sensor or collecting data from third-party social media, it's relying on those third-party sources of data as part of its ongoing operations. And so there is a requirement to have some level of security or visibility and risk management on all the things that are feeding your AI.
All right, I got to unpack it because you just gave us a lot of information. But the crux of it is an AI is out there getting data outside of your control that can influence the way that AI is going to behave in the future.
Correct.
So that sounds pretty scary, right? That's like having an application that the world can interact with. And Microsoft had a great example of this when they unleashed an AI and they had to shut it down in 24 hours, right? Because that was years ago, because of all the malicious people that were out there that were trying to get it to break down and things like that. But with AIs, because they are dynamic, we do have to be concerned about the input and who they're interacting with or what they're interacting with. That's the main thing that's different.
Yeah.
So how in the world, right? I mean, I've got a lot of untrustworthy information out there. And let's not even talk about Gen AI. Let's talk about something simple like a smart camera that has an AI on it now, where it's just doing object detection. We know there are techniques to manipulate these AI models, even with physical objects that they're taking pictures of, right? How in the world am I going to protect against something like that when, let's say I have it at a bus station or a train station, and I'm looking for suspicious behavior. I'm looking for things that could go wrong. How in the world am I going to protect that AI from someone maliciously walking ahead with a picture of something that throws the AI into a conniption fit, and then something bad sneaks in behind it and gets through? How do I protect against that? That sounds impossible.
So, Darren, this is where we have to think differently about how do we protect the AI. So it's not I just need a better firewall, or I need something that comes in and blocks access. Like that model isn't going to work for this kind of environment.
So traditional cybersecurity does not work for those types of attacks.
Exactly.
Completely new stuff.
So this is why I mentioned earlier this idea of continuous testing and validation. And so as your model, if you've got a model that, and I'll take a simple example. Let's say you have a model that's looking to detect if someone's carrying a gun. Okay, that's a
Okay.
pretty good use case of a threat
Yeah.
in a train station. It could be a police officer, that's fine. Could be not, but you want to have that AI doing that function. And a malicious user may, over the course of several weeks, walk in with things that don't look like a gun, but are close to help train the AI to misinterpret something that looks like a gun as a backpack or as a cell phone or something along those lines. And there are techniques. This is the poisoning attack, where they are basically slowly training the AI to not recognize something that's supposed to get it to hallucinate or to forget. Or to make them or have the weights become so broad that anything gets through the door. And so the question is, how do I then check that? Well, I can't block people from walking in front of the camera. However, knowing that your threat that you're actually looking for in that use case, which is less of a generative, it's more of a object detection, being able to do validation of checking to make sure it still recognizes what it's supposed to do on an ongoing basis to see if it's starting to hallucinate, to see if it's starting to get.
I see.
And so, by the way, this is very similar. It's a manual process, but think about how TSA, every once in a while, they throw in an image into the screen that is a bomb or drugs or something bad that's not in there to test the individuals to make sure they're still catching what they're supposed to catch. It's the same idea. So having your system project into the AI what you're supposed to detect in various forms to make sure it's still doing its job as a continuous process, it serves two functions. One, it makes sure that if someone is trying to poison, you can detect it. It also, by having actual images of the things you want to detect, you're reinforcing the learning that you did initially. And so continuous training, and there are a couple ways to actually implement it. The devil's in the details. And I'm not saying any of this is easy, but one is that in the background, you have your AI continually train on actual gun, in this case, guns or the malicious object you're looking for, so that you're reinforcing its training and its weights in parallel. And the other is you run tests. You actually have people, or you have synthesized data being presented to that AI that reinforce what you're supposed to, or check if it's no longer giving you the same weighting. And it's not going to be a binary. It's not going to be, well, one day it was a gun and tomorrow it's not a gun. But where the really important,
you're going to see divergence,
and you're going to see it in the weighting, in the confidence, the probability levels. So you have to be looking at, and again, this is not something that's necessarily presented to the analyst, but it's something that the data scientist can see in the data set when it does the recognition. It says that's a gun. It's going to say by 85% confidence. And if you're looking at the same image and tomorrow it's 84% confidence, 82% confidence. Now there's going to be a range. Right. There's going to be a range because the angle or the color. But if you start to see a deviation in the confidence level, that's an indicator that we should be testing for monitoring ongoing. Now, I'm explaining this. You don't need this for everything. It's not for the, I just need to be able to do.
No, but the concept of continual test,
yes,
it goes to a new level, because when we think of continuous integration and test, or continuous integration and deployment, we're always thinking of software development. I'm developing something new. I'm testing it before it ever goes out. This is a whole new game. I'm continuously testing production.
Yeah, but think about this for a second. This is one of the things that makes AI a little different from your standard application development, but also the same. You build a product, you deploy it. It's a fixed product in the old world. In an AI world, I build a product, I deploy it. It's not a fixed product. It's still being developed in some respects. So the same technique you would use on the dev side to do continuous testing and validation pre-deployment, you want to do post-deployment because you're actually it never stops becoming more. So it's a constant process. And by implementing that process post-production, the same way you had a pre-production and just have it is part of the deployment controls and monitoring, is how you can do that. You don't have to start from scratch. You just take what you did in the dev side and create a model that can implement that on the production side.
Well, yeah, but boy, that breaks some down some of the rules that we have in DevSecOps, right? Which is isolation and segmentation of my environments. What you're saying is the environments are, I still have that but I'm taking some of my dev concepts and putting it into production.
You're
I got to be a
taking
lot more careful.
Yes, but you're taking the testing part, not the
No,
poorly
I get
tested
it.
code. You're doing the same kind of process. You're replicating what you did on the inside. You're going to replicate that on the outside, and it's going to take some extra development. And this is why when we do our initial requirements for what we're going to deploy, we have to look at what is the risk associated with this AI application. Is it recognizing people to give them a coupon to come into my building? Don't care that much. If it's like the example we used earlier where I'm detecting a threat and so there's lives on the line, if I make it a requirement that I need to continually trust this solution, then by definition, I should require the development of a post-deployment testing and validation process as part of the development lifecycle.
No, I get it, which is very interesting. I can also see some new architectural elements coming out of here. I may have a model that I want to protect, meaning I don't want anything coming in that hasn't been validated as input. So I see, and this is Darren's crazy thought, I see um, LLMs in front of LLMs that are protecting a back end model that is extremely critical that I want to make sure that the input coming in has been filtered already before it hits. Because I can see a point in time where an AI might be so critical that I can't have it poisoned. I have to protect it from poisoning, not just roll back, right? Which is another technique, right? If something's poisoned, I just roll back to a model and that's in a known good state. There may be a time where I have to set up the same concepts that we have of firewalls, but not network firewalls, data firewalls. Um, and I can use another LLM to do that. Do you see that as remember, this is Darren's crazy
Yeah,
thoughts going
so
inside.
there's actually some research on this, and it's in two modes. It's using an LLM to pre-validate, and it's actually where most of the research is the results. It's not yet on the input, so that may be a new area of research.
All
But
right,
where
hey,
there,
I'll start another PhD just in cybersecurity, LLM, verification validation. There you go.
yeah,
Thanks, Steve.
absolutely. You're welcome. But on the output side, what some people are looking at doing is as the results are coming from that model, doing an LLM to be able to pre-validate against a known small set to make sure that what the inference was actually still matches what you were doing. So basically having LLM front in the results and reanalyze that results against the input to again with a much smaller set with no outside influence in order to be able to make sure that it's still within range. And that you could call it like an LLM firewall or input output sanitization proxy. But that's a notion that, again, we have not seen this in deployment, but there's research in the universities and other places
So
about how to do that.
is that like a form of guardrails that we see like with ChatGPT 4 and possibly 5? Gemini ran into this problem. Too much guardrails for Gemini,
Yeah.
right? Where it was totally biased and they forced it to be biased. So this is another technique to do that, right? To make sure that the output is following guidelines or guardrails that are there.
So I want to be careful here because this is where you could start to get to one of those turtles all the way down problems. Is that when you're dealing with something like object recognition, it's a finite field. So you know the things you're looking for. And so therefore you can do that kind of when you're talking about something like a chat GPT, which has infinite possibilities of questions, and you're trying to apply some sort of humanistic guardrail, it's always going to end up failing because all I have to do is craft my question correctly to skip past your guardrails. And there's no way to you're going to be on a constant cat and mouse, which is what we're seeing people do. You see that when we put in a guardrail, someone figures out how to get around it. So we put another guardrail and it's a constant battle. So you're never really good. The LLM problem.
Yeah.
The LLM problem is a different approach. So when we're talking about a chat GPT, a Lambda, a Bard, we have to take a different approach. When we're talking about object recognition, object detection, and things like that, we can put some guardrails because there's a finite field. But when we're talking about the infinite side of it or the constantly evolving, understanding of what based on the data is bringing in. That's where the idea of having LLMs, pre-test, so to say, okay, what would it have said if it was just training on the data from 6 weeks ago? What would it say now? Is it, and that takes a lot more work. And so really that isn't a problem. And again, we're not going to use that ChatGPT to make a decision. Is that Darren? We're going to use ChatGPT to provide Darren information. And so looking at a more temporal view with the LLMs and be able to understand, okay, is it shifting across time? Okay, that's an indicator that I need to go back and look at what's going on, as opposed to stop this particular inference. The other thing, and just to pull that string one step further, right now, a lot of the AI, these big, huge honking AIs are applied to these big, broad, it can do anything. It can be a doctor and be a poet at the same time. Where this becomes much more tractable is when we get to the domain-specific implementations. So now my data that I'm training on and that I'm interacting with is in a particular domain. I'm doing electronic medical records as my domain.
Yeah, we call them community Gen AIs.
Yes. Those I can now start to get back towards maybe a larger finite field to be able to do some of that verification and validation on. And so I think we'll always have this hallucination and poisoning problem on the big honking AIs. But as we move them into the enterprise or into the company-specific data sets, we'll be back to having a finite field to be able to do some additional verification and validation. The last thing I'll say, though, is it going to that other topic we haven't covered yet of how do I build a secure and trustworthy pipeline?
All right, so here's the other thing. And this came up with another one of my guests where we talked about people getting access to data they should not get access to through the Gen AI.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another form of cybersecurity data leakage, right? The famous case of the Samsung engineers is out there. We can look at that. But another case that's possible as people start using generative AI for chatbots for helping, consider a bank, for example. If I interact with my bank, they can save a lot of time and money and my effort to get information about my bank account. I would love to go and just say, hey, tell me what these transactions are on my bank account, a Gen AI front end. But that means that Gen AI has to have access to my bank account. Is that a bad idea? How do I isolate data in these Gen AIs? And do I set up an individual RAG just for Darren? So boom, I pop up and all of a sudden I set up its own instance. That seems like overkill, but is that the only way I can have data isolation using a Gen AI is individual RAGs? Or do you know any other techniques, or is this an area that is starting to evolve?
So let me, there's a lot to unpack there, Darren. So let me break it into 3 parts. So one is if you're interacting with your bank and their implementation of a chatbot, they already have your account information. So that
yes, I know. Yeah. I just don't want you coming in pretending like you're me or confusing the Gen AI, right? Saying, "Oh, I want to do this. Switch me to this user," and the Gen AI goes, "Why? I can do that. Yeah." Right?
So in that model there, when we're talking about a corporation providing services to its customers, it's going to be on them to provide the right access controls and separations of data specific for their chatbot. It's going to be hard, but there are ways to do that from an encryption perspective. So your data objects can be encrypted, so only your account can get access to them. And if somebody else comes in and says, I'm authenticated here because I'm also a customer of the bank, but I want to see transactions like this, there's mechanisms on the back end that they can protect that. They can also do things on the front end to help isolate what data you're actively working on and then lose that part. Because again, they're not right.
Okay,
but that's on them servicing you, but it's their AI. They have that data. There's another use case I want to bring up because there's actually a solution that's just been announced on this inside an organization. So let's say we have a chatbot at a company, and a salesperson wants to see the revenue numbers that we're going to go put out, that are coming out, and they'll get, well, here's what we're projecting that's been told to the market. The CFO is going to ask the same question, but because they're the CFO, they're going to get the pre-release number. How do you protect that? So
Yeah, that's a good
there's a
one.
company that literally just launched at RSA called Gnostic that is actually addressing that problem by building a role-based access control mechanism for these language model RAG and generative AI solution.
Nice.
It's a really cool approach. They're not trying to fix your AI. They're overlaying the role-based access control intelligence into so both parties, the salesperson and the CFO, can ask the exact same question against the same data set, but get different responses based on their role at that moment. And that's, again, it's a zero trust way of doing things because you're doing it based on who they are at that given time, and you can make those granular policy decisions. So they're a really cool new company that just came out. It's Scotty Evron and Sunil Wu that are the founders, and they're
Gnostic.
dressing, Gnostic. They're dressing it Gnostic. But that's
Very cool. So do
yeah.
you see this as an emerging area? Obviously, they're not going to be the only ones.
No, it's definitely, and we're seeing this as we migrate from the big chat GPTs to the domain and then the corporate specific. This is going to be a key problem. On the domains, on the big honking ones, on the huge ones, that's going to be a policy of the companies to make sure we're not giving away our IP into these chatbots. So if you're interacting with a chat GPT, the company's going to have policies to prevent you from, or to, from policy perspective, but there needs to be the follow on. What controls could I use to prevent Darren from putting the latest specs into ChatGPT? There is the opportunity for a more advanced flavor of DLP, data loss prevention, data loss protection, which are how we protect from a financial person giving away credit card information online by accident. They scan the output of an individual with a local agent, detecting certain strings. It's hard, it's intrusive, but that's how financial services and healthcare providers do it today. There may be an emerging market for doing that on people's interactions to these external chat environments. The internal ones are going to require controls on the back end to separate what your role is and what type of access you would get.
Okay, so here's the big question. Is security, obviously, we already know this, security was kind of thrown to the side a little bit with Gen AI just gone hog wild crazy. How long do you think it's going to take for it to catch up? Are we talking years, or are we talking a major event that forces everyone's hand to make it happen sooner?
So I'm going to take a little bit.
Already happening.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take a little bit of I don't want to say pessimistic, but realistic view. If we go back over the last 30 years and look at every major technology revolution, the web, services, mobile, insert name of revolution here, every single time security was a second or third tier problem. And then it was only until both there was enough events as well as enough visibility and understanding and enough regulation to drive industry to do something about it. There were lots of innovators every time that a new technology said, hey, we've got the security thing, but they were all niche until it became everybody's problem. And I think we're going to be, again, sadly, the industry is going to repeat that model. There already are innovators who are providing the tools, the techniques, the monitoring, the controls to better protect AI today. But they're still categorized as that small little niche. And only if you've got the most sensitive information and you care about it is anyone going to look at those products. As this stuff becomes more pervasive into our lives and into corporate business, as AI start to contribute to the bottom line. So now you're just like your banks, when they first started putting up their online presence, it was 5% of their market. So they didn't care. The banks, it was all now brick and mortar. Yeah. Now it's under. So now that it's once it gets over a certain percent, and whether that number is 20% or 30% of their revenue or their value is in a particular application environment, then it raises the bar on security. And that's the model. It's always a trailing, but it's really how fast does it become critical to the organization that security becomes critical to the application.
So if I get in too early, I bleed too much money. Right. I got to hit this at the right time. So everyone out there that wants to make trillions of dollars, pay attention, get your technology ready, and then when things happen, have it ready to go, have it mature. And that's the key to this one. That's what I just heard.
And the key is, for the startups that are out there is you want to be starting now because you want to you want to start creating market recognition. You want to start getting test cases for the companies that care so that you can ride the eventual wave. Now, one thing I will say it's different between web and AI as an example. The web took several years to really become critical to organizations, and then it just hockey sticked. Yeah. AI is much faster. And so we're going to see that churn. It's still going to be the same kind of model, but it will be a quicker time to criticality, I think, with the AI, just because it's becoming so much integrated into everything we're doing.
Hey, Steve, we've got so much more to talk about. We're obviously going to do another episode. Thanks for coming on the show today. This was wonderful. You got to stay tuned because there's at least 2 more, maybe 3 more episodes with Steve on this topic.
Thank you, Darren, and looking forward to those follow-ons and beating Anna in the number of podcasts that we've done.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and embrace the digital revolution.